this is the only opportunity that we have to be who we want to be and what we want to be, and starting to do everything we can in our power. And that all gets back to me, Hunter, to the yoga, to the constant journey that is yoga, and finding the wholeness within that's already there, but we forget that it's there.
Hi, and welcome to Yoga Stories Project. Each session, I talk with yogis about their life and practice. I do this to inspire and empower you to bring yoga and mindfulness into your life. Who am I? I'm Hunter Clark-Fields, Mindfulness Mama Mentor. I coach smart, accomplished, overstressed moms on how to cultivate mindfulness in their daily lives. I've been practicing yoga and mindfulness for over 20 years and have taught thousands of women worldwide. Hey there, welcome to Yoga Stories Project. I'm Hunter. I'm so glad you're here today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for sharing and all the great feedback I've been getting on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. I really appreciate your ears. And, I know I say this, but you, the listener, you're the person who makes this happen. I really, really appreciate that. So thank you so much for coming. Today, I'm doing an interview. I'm talking to David Ursillo. He's a really cool yogi and a teacher of writing and yoga and self-expression. So you're going to get a lot out of this, no matter where you are. And it's a really interesting conversation that I really loved and I got a lot out of. Before we dive in, I want to thank Grandma Mari for the iTunes review. Thank you so much. 5 stars. She said, I love this. So she said, one thing that each presenter offers that strengthens my practice is the recurring idea of imperfection and the pointlessness of seeking perfection in my practice, meditation, mindfulness, or yoga. This idea has become the foundation of my practice. I love that. I love that. That's awesome. Keep going. That is so true, that striving for perfection really kills us. It's about this acceptance. All of our practice is about let's lean into now and practice to accept whatever is presenting, there, whatever that rawness of reality is. It's, it's intense and it's not always wonderful and joyful, but leaning into that intensity lets us lean into the joy and lets us get more comfortable when things are uncomfortable. So anyway, thank you so much for the iTunes review. This is a great way to support the podcast. Leave an iTunes review, leave a Stitcher review, and of course, share the podcast. That all really helps just get it out to ears. This podcast has been growing very organically. As you know, I do this out of the love of my heart at this point, and I would love for you to help me help it grow so I can continue to keep doing it and continuing to reach out and to create these podcasts. Before we dive into this episode, I want to thank our sponsor, my program for this episode, Present Mama Community. It has all the wonderful yoga, meditations, and conscious parenting lessons, but the real power in it, I have to tell you guys, is in the monthly group coaching calls. So I do multiple calls a month and I get on the phone with you one-on-one, and last call, we talked about habit building, specific strategies personal to that member. We also talked about communication strategies. This is something that I work with a lot, is communication strategies and talking to another member's mother-in-law and getting help and getting her needs met. So this is really the value of it. For the price of a meal out each month, you get this live support that really helps you go beyond just kind of survival and slogging through to really thriving. So if you are a mama, go check it out, please, or send it to some other mamas, or maybe you're wanting something for Mother's Day. This is a great gift to yourself or from a loved one, presentmamacommunity.com. And I'm seeking another sponsor for this podcast. Do you have a business that would love to reach the ears of smart, yogi, interested people like you? Send me an email at hunter@hunteryoga.com and we can talk about sponsoring the podcast. All right, enough talking. Thank you again so much for your ears. And I know you're going to love this interview. On to this episode. I'm Hunter, and welcome to Yoga Stories Project. Today, I'm talking with David Ursillo, and this is one cool guy, and I'm kind of excited to talk to him. He's a teacher of writing, yoga, and self-expression. He helps self-starters use their words, stories, and voices to find healing within and create love in our world. Very cool, right? In his own words, I'll teach you how to cultivate your gifts, speak your truth, and embody your deepest values every day. Wow, rock on. I love that, David. Welcome to Yoga Stories Project.
Thank you so much, Hunter. Yeah, there's no pressure on me to get all of those things across in this call, I hope, because that would be a tall order. But I'm really happy to be here. It's so nice to speak with you. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast and for you who's listening.
Yeah. Thank you. So David is I'm on a string of talking to Rhode Islanders today. David's a fellow Rhode Islander, like me, growing up there. And so tell us about what I like to start my guests off with is just how you discovered yoga. And you actually, I think you might have written about this. I came across something called Overcrowded Yoga, Pink Hair and an Ounce of Kindness, which is a really intriguing title, I have to say. So is this about your first encounter with yoga?
Yeah, actually. So, I mean, my very first encounters with Yoga, Hunter, were via a little infomercial workout program called P90X. And I've actually heard quite a few people mention that, which is really interesting. But I was living in Boston, let's see, about 5 years ago this month. And some of my buddies were my two roommates that I was living with in Boston. These old college buddies of mine were using the P90X infomercial workout program to like get a workout in at home before they went to work. And I was already self-employed, and by that I mean I had quit my job a year prior or two prior, and was really strategically living off of savings and not making much money. That was my first couple of years of self-employment as a writer and a creative and a blogger. But I started using P90X and developed enough of a familiarity with like Warrior 1 and Warrior 2 to be like, okay, I kind of know yoga. And 6 months later, I finally mustered the willpower to step inside a yoga studio for the first time. And by willpower, I mean that a friend took me to a yoga class because I was too embarrassed to go by myself, and I thought it would be silly and I would be bad at it, and all these common things that yoga is so not about. Fast forward a couple of weeks after that, Hunter, and I was back in my home state of Rhode Island. I had just come off of self-publishing my first book, which I was expecting to be a huge mega success, and it was not that. Go figure. Overloaded expectations, and then you go out with a whimper. And in the wake of self-publishing my first book and still trying to make something of my writing career, I went to a yoga studio near right where I grew up in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, and I went into the yoga room. This was actually the second ever class that I went into. It was a Thanksgiving Day class, and the room was too crowded. And at this point in my life, walking into a yoga room by myself, seeing a crowded room, and being obligated to ask somebody to politely move their mat to the side so that I could fit in next to them induced me to such shame. Like the shame of, and I didn't realize this at the time. I wasn't like, oh, I'm so ashamed to do this. I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to be heard. I didn't want to inconvenience anybody, like as if my physical presence around other human beings was an inconvenience to them. And instead of asking anyone for help, I turned around quietly. I left the room and I left the studio. The only problem, so to speak, is that the yoga teacher saw me leave the room and leave the studio, and she followed me out onto the street. So my very first yoga teacher, whose name is Debbie Valois, who's still my teacher today and a good friend, called out to me from the street outside the studio, and she had remembered my name, the only one other class I'd taken with her, and she said, "Dave, where are you going?" And I used every polite excuse in the book of like, oh, it's a little crowded. That's okay. Don't mind me. I can go somewhere else. I'll be back. And I just used like every polite excuse in the arsenal that I could think of. Debbie insisted on bringing me back into the room, which was pretty amazing considering she had no reason to do it. She had no reason to even notice that I'd come in and out. She went an extra mile just to notice that someone else could use like an ounce of kindness, an ounce of support, and brought me back into the room, helped rearrange some of her loyal students around to make room for me. And that was not only a great yoga class that I took that Thanksgiving day, but I really believe, Hunter, that it changed my whole yoga life, my whole yoga story, because I'm knowing myself. I don't know if I would ever have gone back to yoga after that day, or if the excuses that I made to leave the room because it was too crowded would find their way to manifest themselves as other excuses for me to avoid something that made me feel uncomfortable. And lo and behold, that was going on 5 years ago. Today, I am a certified yoga teacher. I have my 200-hour. Debbie Valois was one of my teachers, just in the studio, but she was also one of my teachers to help me become a yoga teacher. And along with another teacher locally here who has been on your podcast, Coral Brown, who's a good friend of mine, also helped teach me yoga. And, I've been teaching for almost 2 years now. I'm traveling. I'm leading different writing and creativity workshops that have different yoga elements in them, breath and body movement combined with self-expression. And I absolutely love to give people their yoga. And my yoga practices have become such a powerful, grounding, supportive home base for me to practice my own form of personal leadership in my everyday life and to be a leader from a place of love and leading by example. It's been the world to me. And it's kind of scary to think back to how, if Debbie hadn't brought me back into that room, how would my life be different? It's a little bit scary, but it's also a kind of a good reminder that we as yogis, as human beings, have the capacity and the power to really do a lot of good in really simple moments. I'm just grateful that Debbie happened to follow me outside and drag me back in that room, kicking and screaming.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, it sounds like you had this encounter right at the very beginning with one of the big lessons of yoga, which is getting comfortable with some discomfort, with coming up against our edges and seeing this sensation that's not necessarily super pleasant and wonderful, and kind of staying with the help of Debbie, staying despite that. I mean, that's a really powerful lesson that yoga teaches us, and you got it right there in class number 2.
Yeah, absolutely, Hunter. And the crazy thing was that upon realizing I was still developing this relationship to being seen, and I had some people in my life who were really helpful in kind of reflecting back to me that for some reason I was having a real problem being seen. The irony, like the side story, as I mentioned, self-publishing my first book, the irony was I believed in my heart of hearts that I was prepared to be seen and that I wanted to be seen and that I wanted to share messages with people in book form and in written form that I thought were worthy and deserving of many people to read. Like that was a passion, a pursuit, a goal of mine, was to share words and messages with people. It still is today. But at the time, I thought I was more emotionally prepared in my own soul work to be giving those things at that time. But clearly there was an underlying issue with, self-confidence, being seen, being received, receiving love, feeling worthy and deserving of love and kindness from strangers or other people. And, just as a matter of a personal challenge, once I started committing myself to yoga more and more, I would do small things like go to the front of a yoga class rather than hide in the back to challenge myself. And so there was this whole emotional layer of discomfort beyond the physical discomforts that can come from, stretching, elongating, strengthening the body and getting into different breath patterns as we do in yoga classes. I would physically plant myself at the front of the room to know that I couldn't hide from being seen by others, even though it's not that I was being judged or they were judging my clothing. It's just to be physically present in the front of the room or a yoga room started to ingrain in me this lesson of needing to be seen more rather than hiding from it.
I like that. That's interesting, David. Yeah, because your first book I was checking out, it looks like that, that was the big, not the huge success that you had hoped it would be. Was this the one that was called Lead Without Followers?
That's the exact one.
And so that's really interesting. So you're really interested in this idea of leadership. What did you write in Lead Without Followers? What does that mean, Lead Without Followers?
Yeah, absolutely, Hunter. So my story before, I had mentioned that I was self-employed when I was living in Boston and dabbling in P90X yoga. My story with my involvement in leadership really begins on September 11th, 2001, which I witnessed from my high school's grainy, fuzzy library television that still had the rabbit ears, which some of us listening still remember what those look like and what those were. And I was 15 years old when September 11th happened, and it was at a time in my life where I was really starting to formulate a broader understanding of the world and its connectedness, and beyond politics, the connectedness that all human beings have to one another. And watching this day of death and destruction unfold, it kind of felt like the entire world, as I knew it, was crumbling all around me, even from a few hours up the road in Rhode Island, with this happening in New York and Pennsylvania and Washington, D.C. I knew then that there was a calling to leadership within me that was starting to be born. And I said to myself that if there's so much pain in the world, so much suffering, I want to be a part of the good, of the healing, of the giving. And I didn't know how I wanted to do that, how I would do that. But to me, it was the spark of leadership. And to me, leadership just means to take responsibility for yourself and to give from a place of love and to deeply care about others. And I knew that I was capable of doing those things, and it just felt natural for me to pursue that avenue. My career path from high school through college spanned an internship at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. I worked an intern in 6 different offices over 7 years, ranging from state level to federal. And I was really just in constant pursuit of a form of leadership that felt like it was a good fit for my desires and my dreams, which was to make the world a better place. And what I ultimately realized, Hunter, was that I was looking for validation for a calling that was naturally within me. I was pursuing all of these job titles and career paths, which is very natural and normal because we're looking for work and for vocations that honor us and that we can use to help people. But when I made this connection, I had this like awakening moment when I was living in Washington, D.C. And it was actually thanks to writing and some journaling where I had this aha moment, this light bulb moment, where I was constantly in pursuit of something to validate what I had already felt within me, which was that I'm a leader in my life if I choose to be, and that I don't need vast amounts of money, fame. I don't need a job title that tells me that I'm a leader in order to act like a leader in my everyday life. And I don't even need followers. I don't need the validation of other people being called my followers or being referred to as my followers for me to lead from love within. And I had this moment of awakening around that. My belief is the leadership that lasts the longest is quiet leadership. Because when you're capable of leading from a place of such love that it doesn't need to be spoken or convinced, there's this magical gravity that occurs with all human beings, that empathy, the compassion, energy exchanges, where if you're really a good person, you have a sense of mastery over the self, you humble your ego, you do your soul work, you leave a love of wake and kindness behind you wherever you go. I believe that that form of leadership is so gravitational that people naturally, even subconsciously, are drawn to it. And they want to become more like it because it is good. It's the fabric of everything good, wholesome, joyful, loving, and kind in life. And so I started to dedicate myself more to living as a leader by example. And for me, writing was kind of my way of sharing messages like these to the world. And I went on to quit my job with the dream of becoming a best-selling author. Lead Without Followers was my first book. I was very proud of the fact that I had written and self-published a book at all, but I had, as we do, especially when we're younger, these loaded expectations. Like, if I just get over this hump, then it should be smooth sailing from here on out. And then but what actually happens, Hunter, right? It's like you get to that first peak and you're like, oh, there's another one behind it. And you get to that next peak and you're like, oh, there's another one behind that too. So I went on to self-publish 4 more books. I'm still writing more, but the dream of becoming a best-selling author has gone by the wayside because I don't really care about that. I just love writing and sharing and creating artful book projects, reading experiences, and truly teaching people and bringing people into communion together in different rooms and environments where they can have these powerful exchanges and become more unapologetically themselves. Because I believe that we contain all the DNA to be leaders in our lives, but to be perfectly imperfect, to be whole, to be yoked, to be complete within ourselves. And for me, it's these two avenues of breath and body movement that is yoga, the moving meditation that is yoga, and also self-expression, the words we speak, the words that we tell ourselves in our own heads, that become really powerful crossroads for becoming the best version of ourselves that we can be. And by best, I only mean most whole, most capable, most loving. And that's truly what it means to me to lead without followers.
Wow, wow. So this, so you're in the seat of leadership, the Washington D.C. You're doing this work and looking for validation. And I like how you have the clarity to identify that you were looking for validation for this thing, and it seems like a very very contemporary, very now kind of thing that we are all realizing in to some degree or another. Like there's a lot of realization around the world that what you want to be, you can just go and be it. Like you don't necessarily need these gatekeepers and this validation to be what you want to be. And I'm kind of getting a lot of that from message from your story is that you said, screw the gatekeepers, the validation. Like I actually don't need that. You don't need that. You said, I'm a leader in my life if I choose to be, which is so, such a message. And I think, a message that a lot of people need, especially, I dare say, especially women need that message of, that you don't necessarily need all these gatekeepers to live to be who you want to be.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, Hunter. And I mean, when I wrote the book in 2011, I thought it was a pretty nasty political climate that we were living in, and it seems to have only gotten worse over the last handful of years. And to me, like the way that I had framed up the book originally at the time was to use the big picture of what's happening in modern politics, because everybody is disenfranchised to what's happening in politics. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, independent, or even completely politically indifferent, you're like, shit's fucked up on the top level. Pardon my language, but it's all really messed up there. And no matter if you support X, Y, or Z candidate, there's division, there's conflict, there's anger, there's disgust, there's partisanship, there's disheartenment. There's such a deficit of trust with our leaders, political, religious, economic. There's not a whole lot of social leaders that we really gravitate to or trust, even sports athletes who we esteem and revere totally for the wrong reasons, turn out to be dopers or steroid users or cheaters, or they have all these sorts of like personal issues with being like a serial cheater, like a Tiger Woods comes to mind, Lance Armstrong, Alex Rodriguez, all these different types. It's just like across the board, everyone who we've elevated to this level of being something more than human for the things that they own, for the money they have, for their fame, for their popularity, for their job title, falsely inflates this image of what it means to be successful, what it means to be a leader, what it means to be human. And is it any surprise that we keep seeing these people who have been inflated to a status beyond human fall by the wayside and just become human again? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's like we want leaders, we want people to be more than human when it's actually becoming the most human that you can be that makes you the most capable of being a leader, of being a servant, of being a giver, of being someone who leaves. Who becomes a true success, not from the things that she has or the money that she has, but in the love that she leaves in her wake. And that's what we need the most. It's what people are yearning for. It's what people are dying for, especially in today's political climate. People just want to be heard. They want to feel seen and and validated and appreciated, not validated in the sense of being given permission, but validated in the sense that we live in a culture, in a society that says that, democratically, you matter. But everybody feels like to me, everybody feels like they're grasping at actually feeling purpose. And we know that we live in a time and an age where there's a lot of superfluous things. There's, just the nature of capitalism and market economics, where we buy things, we have things, but no amount of things ever makes us feel fulfilled. We want purpose, and purpose is entirely emotional, it's mental, but it's spiritual too. I believe we're yearning for a spiritual purpose beyond religiosity, beyond dogma, and our discontent with who we want to be, leaders, with celebrities, with athletes, in our power. Is because that all gets back to me, Hunter, to the yoga, to the constant see their journey that is they are imperfect, and yoga, and finding the wholeness within that's already there, but we forget that it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have so many responses to what you're saying, but to thinking about sort of that status of elevating people beyond human, and that idea that we have of success and how wrong-headed it is. I mean, like, look at like Robin Williams, who's so successful, but was he as a human in his life? There was something so missing for him, and and to take this idea that we want, part of us rejects our imperfect human nature. So many of us reject our imperfect human nature, and we throw down people for having that imperfect human nature, and therefore we reject it in ourselves, we reject it in others. But I love what you're saying about this, that part of, and I completely agree with you, that like where we struggle, where we've failed, where we've, these are the places where we're learning so much more about what it is to be human and how to have compassion, and to, when we fail and struggle, that this is where we grow so much more than when we're quote unquote perfect or
absolutely, Hunter. And it's, it's like we all know these things, and we can talk about them. But it becomes very difficult to start to embody them. And that's why, to wrap up this kind of side of the story, talking about my own experience with like leadership and book writing, when I self-published that first book and it wasn't hugely successful, it was for like many reasons. Because one, it's hard to write a really good book. Two, I tried to do it all on my own. Three, my writing skills were not nearly what they are now, naturally, after 5+ years more of writing. But for all the reasons that the book wasn't a best-selling hit, which is hard enough as it is if you're an excellent writer, I realized after publishing my first book that I needed to start living my leadership rather than talking about it. And so I made a pretty drastic U-turn, and although I was already writing, I decided to start teaching people how to be writers. And I started using writing, and then ultimately would start using yoga as vessels, practical means or tools by which we could access a state of self that was more whole, and although imperfect, perfectly fine. It's not about the pursuit of perfection. Wholeness to me is coming into relationship with your light sides and your strengths and your gifts just as much as your shadows and your tendencies and your habits. To me, the yoga of being a leader without followers is to stop being an idle pursuit of what seems like it'll be, that what conditions seem like it'll make life easier, or if only less uncertain, and just to come into relationship with the fact that life is uncertain, and that we can embrace that uncertainty as a form of freedom. The freedom that we all talk about and all want, and it's like freedom is everything that we as a culture make to be like the utmost. Just the utmost, especially in the United States. But isn't it funny that like the other side of the coin of freedom is that freedom is continually uncertain.
Yes.
That nothing is guaranteed. And so I believe that the reason that we're pursuing, just commonly, more money, bigger house, more things, is because we think at some point it's got to get easier. At some point, all this uncertainty has got to be minimized by all the things that we have. Maybe to some extent it's true, but I think coming into a relationship with uncertainty and familiarizing yourself with uncertainty as just another way to say freedom is a great way to start to empower yourself to do your soul work, your self work in the everyday. And I use, yoga and writing to be two of those ways of accessing the self and getting comfortable with the discomfort and just doing your best every single day. That's all it really takes.
I like that. I like that reframe of uncertainty as freedom. I mean, because at some point, I totally identify with exactly what you're saying. At some point, it's got to get easier. I absolutely have that thought in the back of my mind, but the constant, that the only certain thing in life is change, that it is that constant change, yet it is our nature to sort of want to resist change. But I want to go back to what you're saying about what we really want. Like what we really want is purpose. And I love this because, I happen to be rereading, because I've already read it once, but there's a few books I read twice, and I'm rereading The Great Work of Your Life by Stephen Cope. And I love, love, love this book, but it talks about Dharma and your purpose and sort of what yoga says about how to find your purpose. And so when you talk about purpose with people in your workshops and with your writing, I mean, you talk about accessing your wholeness and writing and yoga to sort of get that sort of clarity and understanding, I'm sure, about your wholeness. But what do you talk to your students in your workshops about purpose?
Great question, Hunter. I think when I'm talking to people about purpose, and purpose being another great word for dharma, as you mentioned, I almost start before we get into the conversation on purpose with not examining your dharma, but examining your karma. And that's a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last few years as well with storytelling. And a lot of the work that I've been doing, being still self-employed as a writer, a professional writer, is the art of storytelling and helping people understand that everything in our lives comes down to a story. And I don't mean like once upon a time there were two children walking through the woods going to grandmother's house. Not that kind of like a fairy tale or a story or even a fiction narrative. I mean story in the sense that a story is just how we make sense of things. A story is context, it's relevance, it's how we frame up otherwise random events and details that have no order to them. We're telling ourselves stories all the time in conversations about how we got to work, how we got to be what we're doing today, and so on. But we're also narrating from the ego sense. We're narrating different events and details within our own heads. And I think that when you use a tool like writing, journaling, and self-expression in whatever sense to help you examine the stories that are going on in your head, it helps you start to heal your karma. In other words, to learn the lessons that keep repeating and replaying in your life, but also the stories that you keep hearing yourself regurgitate and say to others on instinct, different subconscious thought patterns that manifest themselves within you, but also in actions and your words. Because if your karma is holding you back, if the things that even beyond the spirituality of what karma means, if you need to heal yourself, you need to heal yourself before you can start to heal the world. You need to make peace with your wounds and make peace with the past if it's holding you back before you can step fully into the present and give yourself towards the future that you're dreaming of. And I find oftentimes that when I'm working with writers or creatives and people that have big dreams and big aspirations, there's this confusion around what is my purpose and what am I actually just trying to heal for myself. And it's really powerful to examine that very question and ask, is the pursuit that I'm going towards actually for others or is it for myself? And of course, to some extent, those two things are always going to be intertwined. because I believe that we become teachers of that which we need to learn the most. However, you need to make the distinction, right? You need to understand, where am I trying to heal myself? Am I trying to teach this just to heal myself, or am I trying to teach this to actually leave something that people need, that or that I believe in? And that's the first point where I really believe in examining this crossroads, or the distinction, I should say, between what is my karma, what is my healing, where is my healing required, versus what is my dharma, what is my purpose, what is my destiny. And it's really a powerful thing to question.
So do you feel like, I mean, as you're talking, for me, I see that my own healing and my sort of dharma, my purpose work really overlap. Like for me, what was the hardest, teaching what I needed to learn, what was the hardest for me is kind of that self-understanding and hearing these sort of old patterns come up with my children. When I had my children, and this, like, for me, a lot of anger and rage came up, like, because incredibly cute 2-year-olds also are incredibly enraging. And so that healing was part of what I needed to heal from, as well as teach. And so I'm imagining that in this work, you may see a lot of overlap for people in that healing and then dharma or purpose. And I'm wondering, for you, is there a place where your own healing comes back to your own purpose? I'm thinking about what you said in the beginning about, like, you needed to be, you went into that yoga class and you didn't want to be seen or heard, and your teacher followed you out of the studio, and you had this, like, shame about feeling seen and heard. So I'm wondering, is there a healing there that is linked very intimately with your work now, and helping other people have that self-understanding and letting themselves be seen and heard and understood from the outside, from people reading their writing, and also from the inside?
Absolutely. It's all entwined. It's never very distinct and separate. It's one of the things, that's one of the reasons why when I do, so some of the work that I was mentioning, I do like business storytelling. I help people tell their stories online on their websites. If they're self-employed, if they're a yoga teacher, if they're a writer or an aspiring author, I help them articulate their stories in their About Me pages and their different bios online. So it's a nice vessel. Like, that specific work is a nice vessel because it makes somebody distinguish what is their past and what is their future. Because if you can't communicate through the words where you desire to be going and who you want to help and how you're trying to help people solve their problems or self-actualize and become more whole, it becomes really difficult to be in business for yourself, right? And it's interesting work because you'll see sometimes a client will want to tell their About Me page story by spending 90% of the words talking about their past and 10% talking about where they're heading. And it's more like, well, if you spend your entire story that you're telling somebody, and imagine a human being receiving these words as if they're meeting you for the very first time, to only be experiencing the entirety of your past, but not knowing where you're going, it's a great way to, make a friend and see someone eye to eye, but it doesn't necessarily translate to how are you helping or serving or giving to that person. So that vessel is really convenient because it breaks down in, like, quantifiable numbers or like the number of words on a page, where a client is focusing their energy. Are they locked in the past or in their karma or in their healing? Or are they really truly dedicating themselves to articulating how they're going to help people in the ways in which they help people? For me, I found that for at least for the first couple of years and leading up through my first book. I mean, my first book was truly more for me and my own healing than it was for the reader. And that's one of the reasons why I still have, like, problems with that first book, is because I recognize now that so much of what I was trying to do early on, when I was telling myself that I was giving, when I was telling myself that I was serving, trying to be a leader by example, that I wasn't actually living it. I was trying to validate and make sense of it and prove to myself that it was possible. Mm-hmm. And when I ended up departing this whole realm, this genre of personal leadership writing, I started to give myself more to teaching people how to be writers, because that became a great way, a great vessel for them to experience what it means to heal the self before healing others, and to be in their karma before they can fully stand in their dharma. And I believe it's, I'm oversimplifying it for effect, but I think we're always in essence given opportunities to heal our karma, to recognize how patterns continually repeat themselves, and we need to keep choosing the right path rather than just defaulting into the old one. So for me, it's always been the case, especially going back to that first story of my discomfort with being seen, and almost not even realizing how uncomfortable I was with being seen, but making excuses around, well, the room's too crowded. Well, I don't want to inconvenience anybody. It was all about not just being seen. It was like my third chakra sense of self, my self power, but also my self love, and my fear around others receiving me was that I felt I didn't deserve to be received. And so for me, it's been an ongoing journey into my own self love and self acceptance, and I've definitely made incredible strides. It's always something that's there for me, and I'll notice moments in which I feel like I'm hiding from being seen or being received, and I get into my own personal yoga and examine that and wonder why that's cropping up again. So it's an ongoing journey, but I think wherever your lines are, wherever you're being held back by the fear, gives you an incredible capacity for not only learning and growth, like we've been talking about, Hunter, but for also giving something to other people. So your karma can really easily translate into a form of dharma, of purpose, because whatever you're learning the most, whether it's chosen or not, whether it's chosen you because of unjust circumstance, hardships, suffering, conditions that are beyond your control, or something that is deliberately chosen, you have all this knowledge and ability and experience to be able to share that with others who are in a similar position as you. And sometimes it's just as simple as sharing your story to be a form of leadership by putting yourself out there, by feeling vulnerable and exposed, is to me a form of leading without followers, because you're saying, I'm not going to convince anybody that I have the credentials and the expertise, and I have 10,000 followers on Twitter. This is why you should listen to me and subscribe to my blog. No, you can say, I've had a history with depression and I've overcome it. And if you've been in a similar place, if you are in a similar place, I have some advice for you that I think might be able to help you. And being able to put yourself out there is another form of leading by example. So it's a great way to source your karma, your healing, and to use those lessons to alchemize the experience and put it on display for others to learn from. And I think it's a really beautiful way to help people in a very direct sense by using your own experiences and your healing. Because I believe if you felt that way, if you've been through that, then someone else is going through it too.
Absolutely. I mean, and what you're saying about, like, you felt like you didn't deserve to be seen, that issue or work around self-love and self-acceptance, I feel like all of us have that, like every single one of us, like the listener, like you probably have that too. Like I have that, like, and it, for me, it lights up all kinds of bells around like my own personal dharma, like about, why do we all feel that way? And then of course I think, well, maybe it's the way we were raised, and, and a lot of the way that we parent, we use words that aren't accepting, and we send a lot of unaccepting messages to our kids inadvertently. And so this all goes to sort of, get me excited about my dharma, which is about teaching parents how to sort of use words of acceptance and to become more grounded and mindful in themselves, heal themselves before they can, really parent well. A lot of that comes from self-understanding and self-healing, and having that understanding to know, like, am I responding? In the words, am I responding from, a karma, an old repeating pattern, right? That's come down through maybe generations of my family, or am I actually responding from the present moment? And what is the, it's just incredible. Like, it's so much overlap for me, and it's making me very enthusiastic.
Yeah, I can tell, and I love it. And it's another great way to think of it, Hunter. Something that just kind of pops into my mind is, how karma and dharma interplay, how like your own soul work, your own like the stuff that you need to sort through, the shit, the shadows, the habits, the tendencies, are overlap with what you give to the world, right? Because there's a natural overlap and interplay between the self, you, and others, just people around you. And that's another great example for me, of being a quiet leader or a leader by example, is because just by doing your soul work, by getting into your self-examination, your self-inquiry, by doing your yoga on the mat and off it, and becoming the best version of yourself that you can be, to not be controlled by the ego or the mind or habits or tendencies and traits, to expand your love, to not let fear or skin deep differences dictate your belief systems and your behaviors. That's enough to be a leader in your life, because you naturally, as a member of society, as a human being, a social creature, will interact with other people. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not a hermit hiding somewhere in the Himalayan foothills. You're engaged with people. You have relationships. You have, a number of family members, of friends, a community. And although today I feel like technology, for how beautiful it is to bring us together, somehow also isolates us from one another in everyday life, we always have to remember that a simple exchange with a stranger on the street, a passing smile, a hello, a conversation, can profoundly change lives. And it's because we're divine creatures. We're all mirrors to one another. We are all love and loving beings, but love at the source and energy at the source is what we are. And so it stands to reason that a simple passing exchange can be absolutely extraordinary. Like a smile to a stranger who's having a bad day, who's forgotten what it's like to be smiled at. It's like it could be a cosmic revolution. And you might not ever see the results of that revolution, but it's not the point. Like with my teacher, Debbie Valois, bringing me back into that room, she had no idea that I would become a loyal student or a friend or a teacher. And now, a teacher with her at our same studio of Laughing Elephant Yoga here in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. And it's not about that either. It's just about, it was her being kind and loving and caring and supportive. And that's enough. That's enough to be called leadership to me. That's enough to be called love and purpose and meaning and dharma. And I think that's really special, because it's worth remembering. You don't need to bend over backwards or spin yourself into weeks and months and years of thought trying to figure out what your purpose is. If you just start living your yoga, that's enough. And that's, to me, is leadership.
Yeah, that's at the sort of at the end of the Bhagavad Gita and the story of Arjuna, and it's like, just stop. It's like, don't worry about it. Just take the next action. A lot of it is about letting go, which I love that. Sort of what you're saying is like, just let go and be there. Be real, be kind, kindness.
Arise, Arjuna, take up the path of yoga.
Yes. So what is your, David, it's been, I could probably talk to you about geek out on stuff forever with you.
Absolutely.
But we've got to wrap up. And before we go, I wonder, what is your advice for the listener for making steps towards their own self-expression, for making steps towards telling their own story?
Beautiful question. For me, Hunter, that I really started to use my yoga practice, my physical asana practice, as a means of developing self-confidence, and the self-confidence that I felt was required to not only feel seen and received by others in a studio classroom, but also developing the inner strength to feel capable of expressing myself more fully, going more towards the edges of what I was afraid to say, but felt called to share with the world. And what I would recommend people do is to use the moving meditation that is yoga and the healing art that is yoga as a vessel to get more honest with themselves and drop into a place of heart-centered self-expression. We tend to overthink when it comes to self-expression and writing because it's a very heady practice. However, if you can use something like movement, it could be literally having a journal by the side of your yoga mat. I'm very well known as a student in my yoga my local yoga studio to have a journal by my side at all times. And I'll oftentimes stop taking class and just start writing something. Sometimes it's a poem, sometimes it's notes, sometimes it's just the form of movement and breath can really inspire a lot of clarity and revelation. So that's a great way to start to use movement to channel effortless self-expression rather than overthinking it. And when it comes to telling your story, you're already living and telling a story. You're already telling your life's story. It's just a matter of examining how you're telling it. How are you delivering it? Start to listen when you meet someone new. What are the words, the terms, the ideas that come to mind? And is it how you want to be expressing your story, or do you want to start to tell it in a new way? Because all it takes is one choice, one decision, one commitment to start living a different story, to transition from being a victim of something into a champion of it, to move from a place of confusion or I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know this, I don't know that, to admitting I'm still figuring out exactly what my purpose is, but I know it's meeting at the crossroads of X and Y. Or I know the question that I'm trying to solve is, just be a little bit more daring with admitting that you don't know everything. Because once you start using those words and giving yourself more to the words that are calling to you, it's when the universe starts to respond. And when people who you meet, people who think they know you, start to know you even more. And it's like, it really is like things on a cosmic level start to shift when you use your words to your advantage. And it's almost like a form of prayer in everyday conversation, in the thoughts that are going on in your head, in the words that you journal. These all become forms of prayer or affirmation or intention. And I believe the universe starts responding once you bridge the gap between just thinking it or just feeling it and expressing it.
I love that. Yay. I love that, David. That's so nice.
Thanks, Hunter.
So, okay, thank you so much. Before you go, tell the listener how we can find you. You can always go to yogastoriesproject.com and find the interview, but tell us where we can find you. You're on the interwebs.
Absolutely. So you can find me at daveursillo.com. It's just my first name. Last name is URS as in Sam, ILLO.com. And that's my main online home where you can find where I'm teaching my yoga classes. I'm also starting to lead some retreats, destination retreats in places like Costa Rica and Iceland, where we're combining yoga and writing. So you can do some of both and take advantage of this interplay between body movement and moving meditation and self-expression.
Cool.
And you can also find my online writers group at literatywriters.com.
Cool. Maybe you guys will meet me on one of those retreats.
I hope so.
That would be awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, David. It was so nice to talk to you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Hunter, for having me on. And to you who's listening, remember to just keep doing your yoga, get out into the world, start leading by example, and have fun.
Thanks so much for listening. Wasn't this a great conversation? I loved talking to David. I hope you check out his work. Remember to support the podcast, share it around, leave an iTunes review. That really helps. Leave a Stitcher review, share it with your friends, and check out our sponsor, presentmamacommunity.com. We also have space for a new sponsor. If you have a business you're interested in partnering with me, send me an email at hunter@hunteryoga.com. Next time on the podcast, I'm going to do another solo cast. And one thing I'm interested in doing is doing some answers to your questions. So do you have a question? If so, send me an email at hunter@hunteryoga.com and I will answer your question long form on the podcast. So I'm really interested in doing this, reaching out. I'm going to be doing another solo podcast soon. Also, if you have any guests that you think are going to be amazing for the podcast, feel free to email me about that, hunter@hunteryoga.com, or find me on Facebook. I think it's Facebook.com/HunterCYoga, or maybe that's Twitter. I don't know, but you can find me. And have a wonderful week, my friend. Namaste.